Thank you very much for inviting me to join your conference today. I'm sorry I'm not presenting live. I'm based in the UK, and I think we worked out that this is not a time of day when I'd be at my best. I hope to attend as much of the conference as possible, though. I'll also include my contact details at the end of this presentation, and I'm very happy to hear from anyone afterwards. I'll just very briefly give a bit of context to QAA, which is the UK's quality body for higher education. Regulation of higher education in the UK is devolved across the 4 nations, and this has implications for our relationship with higher education providers. As a rule of thumb, anything regulatory sits in the public domain. So, for example, our qualifications framework, which is known by the acronym FHEQ, enhancement activity and guidance are developed with our subscribing member providers, and access by non-members to those activities and resources is limited. Pretty much all higher education providers in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are members by way of their regulatory or funding bodies, but providers in England have more choice. Currently, we have 292 member providers, 249 of those are in England, and overall, those figures include all but 2 English universities, as well as many colleges and independent providers from across the 4 nations. Work on micro-credentials became a more formal project for QAA around 18 months ago, and we've been working with our member higher education providers on it. Initially, we explored emerging interest in micro-credentials, both within the UK and globally, and what was driving development. Also, details such as naming conventions and understanding of the various terms around micro-credentials. After that, through our Quality Compass series, which is where we explore current developments and debates in higher education, we did some more structured thinking around micro-credentials, and particularly how our work and proposed definition were placed in the context of the evolving global picture. We're now in the process of drafting a characteristic statement for micro-credentials, which is a guidance document, and we're exploring practice further as part of that. And I'll come back to this. We know we're not working in isolation on the subject of micro-credentials. Within Europe, particularly pertinent work for us has come out of the European MOOC Consortium, or EMC. That includes the UK provider, the Open University. The EMC published its Common Micro-Credential Framework in 2019. This has got quite a tight definition, including that a micro-credential must be at least 10, but no more than 15 credits, and that's UK credits. It's also primarily aimed at final year of undergraduate or postgraduate taught levels, and it's mainly concerned with online delivery. There are examples of providers in the UK working to that model, but there's also a lot more diversity than that in terms of module size, level, and delivery rate. A particularly interesting project for us is the European Commission's European Approach to Micro-Credentials, which published an interim report in December 2020 and anticipates publishing its final recommendations next month. The report from last year openly acknowledges that no consensus could be reached across the group on the size of a micro-credential. Their approach to standardization has instead focused on proposals for the minimum information that should be provided on completion. So, for example, credits gained, name of the awarding body, subject or assessment outcome. And they've consulted during this year on aspects of this, including the level of detail which is necessary and appropriate. And a key driver for this has been to enable portability of micro-credentials across providers and nations. We've also been looking at what is developing or has developed further afield from the UK. New Zealand was one of the front runners in formalising an approach and has a very structured system with a clear definition of what a micro-credential is, and it keeps a register of provision. There are parameters around size, although much wider ones than the European MOOC Consortium's framework, because the New Zealand framework allows anything from 5 to 40 credits. Others are less prescriptive again. For example, eCampus Ontario simply talks about something that is shorter than traditional education credentials. And the International Council for Distance Education refers to a relatively small learning project. The Malaysian Qualifications Agency is another which seems to me to be quite far ahead in this area, and with another slightly different approach. It's an approach of guidance with references to other existing frameworks, and that's the approach that we've chosen to take at QAA as well. Just before I go on to that, a quick word about the recent UNESCO project, which Emeritus Professor Beverly Oliver led. It's called Towards a Common Definition of Micro-Credentials. I was involved in that as part of a group of over 40 people with very diverse global representation. The outcome was very much couched in terms of being a conversation starter rather than an endpoint, and it recommended 4 key characteristics, which I've included here. From the perspective of QAA, we're very comfortable with this definition. It presents the key elements which help to protect credibility without constraining practice unnecessarily. And so here is the definition that QAA has developed. Our view is that a micro-credential does carry academic credit, and that is mapped to a recognised level of the 2 UK frameworks for higher education qualifications. This meant we were excluding from our considerations initiatives which are not credit-bearing. On balance, we felt that those fell outside of scope because where no academic credit is being awarded, they're not potentially building up to an academic qualification. Some of these might be a matter of individual provider reputation, but not the sector as a whole. Others might be arrangements with professional bodies, and they will then oversee quality assurance arrangements. The second point here about micro-credentials being subject to standard quality assurance mechanisms has not been controversial at all. Irrespective of labelling, we found that higher education providers in the UK all put anything credit-bearing through quality assurance processes, and this was something that was clearly taken very seriously. Then the third characteristic here, we have also resisted placing parameters around the size of a micro-credential. Our view, and very much my view, is always that regulation should be the minimum necessary to safeguard academic standards and the quality of the student learning experience. There's also the autonomous nature of the UK higher education sector. Any parameters imposed felt to us to be arbitrary. The one caveat is that if the proposed learning would constitute a qualification that already exists, then it isn't a micro-credential. An example would be 60 credits at postgraduate taught level, which exists as a postgraduate certificate on our qualifications frameworks. 60 credits at undergraduate level, however, wouldn't be a problem. To return briefly to the context in which we're working within the UK, there are specific credit frameworks in place. These are for Scotland, Wales, and England. They all enable micro-credentials and credit transfer between providers, and they all recognise lifelong learning. So in many respects, we already have the structures in place to support ambitions around micro-credentials. Government policy is also driving their development. There are proposals from Westminster to bring in a lifelong learning or loan entitlement from 2025, which would enable people to access funding for higher education at different times throughout their life, rather than in one continuous block. And this is where micro-credentials could particularly come into play. These might enable someone simply to dip into a module every so often in a way that enables upskilling in something specific, or theoretically might provide an alternative route to gaining a higher education qualification. However, this only relates to England. The different funding and regulatory bodies across the UK have responded in different ways to emerging policy and the opportunities presented by micro-credentials, with various opportunities for higher education providers to get funding for pilots. At QAA, we need something that will support all 4 nations, and this is where our characteristic statement comes in. It's not regulatory, but it will provide guidance around typical parameters and approaches. In terms of headlines, first, there is the nature of micro-credentials. They tend to be very focused on specific knowledge or skills. They could be related to any subject area and might be drawn from current provision or could be new and bespoke. Their role in upskilling and reskilling means that they are likely to be employability focused, but this does mean there's a need when designing them to avoid an overemphasis on the practical skills so that they don't end up simply being training that carries higher education credit. They can be delivered very flexibly. That could be online, on campus, a hybrid, or in the workplace. They could be an intensive day or over several weeks. They could be asynchronous to the point that the learner decides when she or he wishes to join, engage, and submit for assessment, rather than the provider determining start and end dates and a timetable for activity. And as well as having credibility in themselves, there needs to be the means of building them into a macro-credential. We're avoiding the word student in favour of learner. While some of the people who engage with micro-credentials might end up being more akin to part-time students in the more traditional sense, the real benefit of these qualifications is that they can provide an opportunity for someone to engage in higher education as a form of continuing professional development. This could mean that someone is taking a 10-credit micro-credential alongside having a full-time job and a range of personal commitments. Their relationships with the higher education provider and the course will be very different to those of a full-time student or even a part-time student enrolled on a substantive qualification. And they're likely to take place outside of normal hours, which will raise challenges around resource and entitlements beyond the academic experience. These learners will also have had highly variable education experiences. As a consequence, a lot of support will be necessary around academic requirements, and they're likely to need more guidance around navigating support as well. We've looked at a number of different ways in which micro-credentials could build into a larger qualification. So, for example, an individual who stays within the same provider and gradually builds modules from a recognised pathway. Another possibility is that a group of providers could form a consortium, or a learner could collect micro-credentials and then ask an awarding body to accept them all through recognition of prior learning. In that way, they could achieve a final award by way of something like a final specially designed capstone module. This will challenge the sector in a number of ways, not least around traditional senses of registration period in which a qualification must be completed. And we tend to give credit a shelf life, after which it is no longer accepted under providers' RPL policies, often around just 5 years. And this does not fit with the idea of lifelong learning either. Then there's the issue of quality management. This varies internationally, but in the UK fits within institutional autonomy to a large extent. If higher education credit is being awarded, there is a responsibility to meet expectations of quality management. But there's also a risk, on the other hand, of over-engineering, meaning that the flexibility required by micro-credentials cannot be met, or as somebody put it to me recently, we just end up rehashing what we've already got, rather than doing something quite innovative. So next steps for us. We're using this year to develop and test the characteristic statement, but we'll be keeping it under review. In many respects, the challenges are not micro-credentials themselves, but other issues. So first of all, funding, because cost will still be an impediment for many potential participants. There is the articulation with employment and how micro-credentials have credibility as part of a work experience portfolio. There are issues of the stackability or transferability. Whilst it's perfectly possible, theory and practice don't always match. And then returning to government policy, how is success measured? Higher education providers in the UK will be very wary of any sort of measurement that potentially damages their metrics, particularly given the climate of UK higher education regulation and monitoring. So very much the start of a journey for us, and we'd be delighted for opportunities to discuss these and exchange practice. Thank you very much.